I'm going to talk about two small, unusual 16th century Dutch merchant ship models, both of which were early developments of ships that can be still seen today. I first came across a class of ship named Crompster in Dr. Frank Howard's book, Sailing Ships of War, 1400 to 1860. He says that they were small, heavily armed merchant vessels, and Dr. Howard called them the pocket battleships of their day. It was an intriguing description, and I thought one of them would make an interesting model. They were primarily Dutch warships, ideally suited for amphibious operations around the coast against the Spanish in the wars between 1570 and 1610. It was only after the defeat of the Armada in 1588 that their strategic advantages were fully recognised in England. Sir Walter Raleigh proposed that small merchant ships, such as hoys, could easily be converted and armed, becoming, as he said, Crompster-type warships, capable of coastal defence and transporting troops into estuaries, tortuous channels, and defending themselves whilst landing the troops. 4 Crompsters were built in England, but apart from their names, there appear to be no illustrations or details of any of them. When the fear of invasion by Parma disappeared, the need for Crompsters to defend the Thames estuary also disappeared, and no more appear to have been built in England. So I decided to concentrate on a Dutch version. These, incidentally, were sometimes called Krom-Stevens, which translates, I believe, into curved stems. And you can see that, of course, on the model that you're looking at. Surprisingly, however, it soon became clear that information, and especially illustrations of these craft, were few and far between. And I had great difficulty in finding information. However, fortunately, there is a contemporary book by Dutch authors Ollers and Heestens in the National Maritime Museum, which contains this excellent double-page engraving. The title of this engraving is as follows: "A fleet of 2,800 merchant ships, with all the supplies of war, was dispatched against Flanders by the most illustrious Prince Maurice on June the 22nd, 1600. In this mass of shipping, it is possible to identify 3 Crompsters. There's one there, and it's interesting, it has a large lantern, so it's an important vessel. It may be even that it's Maurice sitting on there controlling all the things, I don't know. Then there's a small Crompster there, and right up in the foreground, beautifully detailed, there is a 3rd Crompster. It has a broadside of 6 guns, and I decided that that was the one that I would model. Before I start talking about the model, I'll give a bit of a historic context to this etching, which is a rather incredible view, I think, of all these boats, all going in different directions. So I'll tell you how it happens. This is a map of the Netherlands, which shows the Dutch Republic in red and the Spanish occupied areas in yellow. Prince Maurice was instructed by the States General to raise an army of 12,000 men and 2,000 cavalry and take them south to capture Dunkirk. This involved crossing the Scheldt estuary and making his base at Ostend. There's the Scheldt River, and therefore this is the estuary here. And Ostend, where he was going to make his base, was there. As you can see, it's a little enclave which is controlled by the Dutch. Dunkirk is down there. The army never got to Dunkirk. At a point about halfway between Ostend and Dunkirk, on the 2nd of July, 1600, near the town of Newport, they met up with a Spanish force. And after a great battle, the Spanish were routed. However, both sides had suffered severe casualties, and therefore Prince Maurice decided to abandon the plan to capture Dunkirk. And so presumably he clambered back into his 2,800 boats and went back up north. This is the Crompster enlarged from the etching on which the model is based. It is a short and beamy ship with a quarterdeck and poop, but no raised foredeck. It has 2 masts and is fore and aft rigged. It appears that its lines were more like those of a yacht rather than those of some of the other types of Dutch small craft of the period. They were of relatively shallow draught, but had no lee boards. The first thing to do was to draw up a set of plans. There are virtually no, as you know, contemporary drawings of early individual 17th century ships, but there are several treatises on design principles. Having estimated the length of the Crompster's gun deck, which I decided was about 65 feet, and from this, I was able to draw up my interpretation of the etching. The model is built in lime in the style of dockyard or navy board models of the period. Whales are painted black and the hull is planked above the lower one, with the gunnels, upper rails and trennels in walnut. The scale of the model is the classic scale of 1:48. The gun deck is continuous from bow to stern, with a light spar deck above, running from the bow as far as the quarterdeck. Only the frame of the spar deck is shown on the model, so you can look down at the guns underneath. Whether the spar deck was covered with gratings or planking, I'm not sure. It's probably a mixture, actually. The headroom on the forward part of the gun deck must have been rather limited. The main mast is sighted further forward than usual and carries the huge sprit yard and sail. In the bows, the winch controls the anchor cable, which was probably stored below the gun deck. The Crompster's armament is shown on the etching to be 6 guns on each broadside, with possibly 2 in the stern, not shown on the model. It was said at the time, referring to Crompsters and armed hoys, they carry for the most part principal good artillery, some demi-cannons and many whole culverines. So I decided to use iron short-barreled culverines on the model, turned in wood and painted black. The gun port lids are side-hung. The etching shows no lid for the forward gun on each broadside. This can't be right, so perhaps a portable lid was used when the gun was inboard and not ready for use. This slide also shows the ship's 2 elm tree pumps on the gun deck. It is assumed that the captain and officers had their cabins in the stern, but there are no windows or lights of any kind shown on the etching. The model has 2 leaded lights in the stern in arched and column settings. There are no other decorations on the ship. The ship was steered by a whipstaff. I'm sorry, it's a rather poor picture. There's the whipstaff, sighted after the mizzenmast on the quarterdeck. This is connected to the tiller at high level on the gun deck. The helmsman had limited view of the sails through a high-level window in the quarterdeck bulkhead there. In the English Navy, the Crompster, as a distinct type of ship, stopped when the life of the last of the original four ended, sometime in the 17th century. However, armed merchantmen continued to play an important role to this day. It's the last view of the etching and the model. You can see here that it doesn't have a lid, but it would have to have some kind of solution because otherwise the water would just go straight in. So that is the first of the two Dutch ships. This is the next one. It's a herring bus of 1598, and the model shows it fishing with its drift net deployed down here. There is a lot more information available on herring buses of the period. There are etchings, as you'll see in a minute, and a book, 17th century Dutch merchant ships by A.J. Hoving. And it's a very interesting book for modelers because there are plans of the various ship types, and there are drawings especially for model ship builders. So that helped enormously. Herrings have been fished in the North Sea since before the 12th century even, with open boats making short trips from ports on the Dutch coast, returning with fresh herring for local consumption. However, when a method of preserving the fish by jibbing and salting them in barrels was developed, everything changed, so that by the 16th century, fleets of hundreds or more three-masted vessels, escorted by several warships for protection, would leave the Dutch coast at the beginning of the summer season, following the herring shoals as far north as the Shetland Islands. They would stay at sea for several months at a time. They used drift nets several kilometres in length, which were brought on board at regular intervals. The fish were immediately jibbed, packed with salt in barrels and stored in the hold. This etching shows that on reaching the fishing grounds and deploying their drift nets, the buses struck down their fore and main masts, leaving a single small square sail on the mizzen. When moving to a different location, they raised the foremast again, as this one has done. You can also see one of the escorting warships on the etching. The Great Fishery, as it was called, caused a lot of conflict with the English, and fishermen on the northeast coast came into conflict from time to time with the buses. Fishing was by drift nets, which by the 16th century were several kilometres in length, supported just below the surface by a top rope with floats. A bottom rope helped to keep the net vertical in the water like a curtain. The sail on the mizzen was used to stop the ship drifting onto the net and kept it taut. The mesh of the net was sized so that when a fish swam into it, it was caught by the gills. This etching shows the net being recovered. The top rope is attached to the ship's capstan and comes in over the bow where the floats are removed and the net is released from the top rope. The bottom rope and the net are hauled in over a roller attached to the bulwarks amidships. The fish were removed from the net here, immediately jibbed or gutted, salted and put into barrels in the hold. At regular intervals, merchant ships came out from the coast to purchase the barrels of fish and to resupply the fleet with fresh barrels and salt. This allowed them to continue to fish without interruption for as long as they wished. The herring bus, therefore, could be said to be the world's first factory ship. There's a merchant ship, and you can see there are several. There's the top rope coming in, going down to the capstan there. This has been interesting. I'm not quite sure what happens here, but I think this is part of the crew, and they have a hook here where they can pull at the net if it gets twisted up here. Herring buses of this period were 60 to 70 feet in length. The model is built to a scale of 1:72. It is a solid block of lime faced with planks also in lime. The whales, bulwarks, and stern area are in steamed pair. This also shows the whipstaff again for steering. You can see the mainmast is supported on this beam here, and the foremast is supported down here. The fore and main masts were hinged to the deck with large steel plates. The foremast remains attached to its plate and can be raised and lowered. This one here. It can be raised and lowered when the bus moved position. The mainmast, however, when lowered, was released from the hinge and secured against the bulwarks on the side. Must have been quite a problem. I think the reason for that was probably to give the crew enough space to work on the fish as it came in, because it was coming in through here. And here they would be packing it, and then the barrels would go down into the hold. There was some cabin accommodation in the stern, and there are records that because the fishing voyages were so long, some captains took their wives and family with them. The herring bus continued in use during the 16th and 17th centuries, and although the fishing technique did not change, some of the design features of the ships did. The stern took on the round, bulbous onion shape of other Dutch merchant ships of the period, and the bus increased in length, but only had 2 masts, and these were not lowered when fishing. This sketch of a bus of the late 16th century shows how the stern has changed shape and the length of the ship has increased. And that is the end of my presentation.